Fire isn't just a cool party trick, it's the difference between a cozy evening and becoming a human popsicle in the wilderness. Trust me, I've seen enough survival shows where people rub sticks together for 3 hours only to end up with splinters and wounded pride. But the Inuit? They've got this fire-starting business down to an art form, even when Mother Nature decides to throw a wet tantrum. For thousands of years, the Inuit have mastered the art of fire-making in some of Earth's most brutal conditions. We're talking about places where the rain feels like tiny ice daggers and the wind howls louder than a teenager who just lost their phone privileges. Fire means everything here. It's your kitchen stove, your central heating, and your survival insurance policy all rolled into one. And archaeological evidence shows that some Inuit settlements maintain the same fire pit for over 50 generations. That's like keeping the same sourdough starter alive since the Roman Empire was still doing its thing. But before we dive into the nitty-gritty of actually starting these fires, you'll need to know about some pretty special materials that the Inuit have been using since way back when. And believe me, they're not what you'd expect to find in your average camping store. First up is fatwood, nature's own fire starter. It's basically pine wood that's so full of resin, it makes a teenage face look dry in comparison. The cool thing about fatwood is that it's like that friend who's always reliable. Even when it's soaking wet outside, this stuff burns like it's been hanging out in a desert for years. Then there's moss and lichen, which might sound about as useful as a chocolate teapot, but these little plants are fire-starting superstars. The Inuit specifically look for old man's beard lichen, and yes, that's its real name, probably named by the same person who thought Iceland and Greenland were good names for those places. This stuff is incredible because it can be bone dry on the inside, even when the outside is wetter than a seal's swimsuit. The Inuit have identified over 12 different types of moss and lichen that work great as fire starters, each with its own special burning properties. But the winner of the fire-starting world is birch bark. This stuff is like nature's newspaper, except it's waterproof and doesn't have any depressing headlines. The Inuit discovered that birch bark contains something called betulin, which makes it burn even when it's damp. Here's a fact. A single piece of birch bark can contain up to 250,000 microscopically thin layers, each one ready to catch fire faster than gossip spreads in a small town. The Inuit don't just grab any old birch bark, though. They look for the papery white stuff that's already starting to peel off the tree. Another fact is that if you stack all the layers from 1 square foot of birch bark, it would be taller than a basketball player. They collect it during the dry season and store it in special waterproof pouches made from seal skin. These pouches are so well made that they could probably keep your phone dry during a swimming pool selfie session. Not that I'm recommending that. There's also a specific technique for harvesting each material. The Inuit have a saying that translates roughly to, "The forest gives twice, once when you learn where to look, and again when you find what you need." They teach their kids to identify these materials before they learn to count, which makes sense because being able to find fire-starting material is slightly more important than knowing your multiplication tables when it's minus 40 degrees outside. Some Inuit communities have special storage areas just for these materials, kind of like a fire-starting pantry. They keep their fat wood stored vertically to let any moisture drain out, and they hang their moss and lichen in special drying racks near the cooking fires. One clever elder told me it's like having a savings account, except instead of money, you're saving yourself from freezing. But here's the thing. Having all these materials is just the beginning. It's like having all the ingredients for a gourmet meal, but not knowing how to cook. That's where the real magic happens, with a couple of rocks that look totally ordinary, but can create sparks hot enough to start your fire. And let me tell you, the way the Inuit use flint and steel would make any Boy Scout troop leader jealous. Now that we've got our fire-starting ingredients ready, let's talk about how the Inuit managed to create sparks even when the rain is coming down harder than a teenager's excuses for missing curfew. The flint and steel method might seem simple, just hitting rocks together, right? Well, my first attempt in the rain ended with me looking like a wet cat trying to tap dance with exactly 0 fires to show for it. The Inuit, though? They've mastered doing this even when water is dripping off their noses. They start by using their traditional parka hood as a mini shelter, creating a dry workspace right in front of their chest. They use a specific type of flint that's usually a dark gray color, kind of like a thundercloud that's already soaking you. The steel they use isn't just any old metal either. Traditional Inuit steel strikers are work-hardened over time until they're tougher than a math test on Monday morning. Here's a fact. Tests have shown these traditional strikers can create sparks that reach temperatures of over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which explains why they can still work in the rain. But here's where it gets really interesting. Their secret weapon is something called charred cloth, which they keep bone dry in waterproof sealskin pouches. It's basically regular cloth that's been burned in a special way until it looks like what happens when I try to iron my own shirts. The Inuit traditionally make it from cotton or linen, though in the old days, they used to make it from dried moss that had been pounded until it was as soft as fabric. The technique itself is where most people end up looking like a drowned rat with nothing to show for it. You don't just whack the flint and steel together like you're trying to start a rock band in a storm. The Inuit use their body positioning to keep the materials dry. They'll often work under a protruding rock or create a small lean-to with their waterproof outerwear. They use a smooth, controlled striking motion, kind of like trying to peel a very thin slice off the steel while playing musical chairs with the raindrops. Once a spark lands on the charred cloth, you've got to protect it from the rain like it's your last piece of chocolate. The Inuit are masters at this part. They quickly wrap the glowing ember in a ball of superfine tinder from their dry pouch, then shield it with their bodies as they gently blow on it. Statistics show that an experienced Inuit fire starter can get from spark to flame in under 30 seconds, even in the rain, which is faster than most of us can find an umbrella when we need one. Speaking of rain, there's another method that's even more impressive where you don't need any metal at all, which is pretty handy when your flint and steel are soaked from the downpour that's been falling like someone up there left the celestial faucet running. All you need is a few pieces of wood and some string. But trust me, it's not as simple as it sounds. Friction fire making is like trying to do a magic trick while someone dumps water on your head. It shouldn't work, but somehow the Inuit make it happen. The bow drill is their go-to method, and it's basically like playing a tiny violin that makes fire instead of music. The first time I tried it, I ended up with a blister that looked like I'd high-fived a cactus. The setup sounds simple. You need a bow made from caribou rib or flexible wood, a spindle shaped like a pencil, and a hearth board that looks like it's been attacked by a very determined woodpecker. But in the rain, finding dry wood is about as easy as finding a penguin in the desert. That's why the Inuit keep pre-made sets wrapped in waterproof sealskin. The magic happens in the wood selection. Did you know that different woods create different temperatures when rubbed together? The Inuit discovered that combining a softer wood hearth like cedar with a harder wood spindle like birch creates the perfect fire-making duo. Scientists recently tested this traditional knowledge and found that this combination creates friction temperatures up to 800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to make toast if you had any bread out there in the wilderness. Now the technique is where most people give up and wish they'd packed a lighter. You've got to wrap the spindle in the bow string, set it on your hearth board, and then start sawing back and forth with the bow like you're playing the world's most intense game of hot cross buns. The Inuit add a special twist. They use a limestone or bone handhold to hold the top of the spindle steady. This reduces friction at the top while maximizing it at the bottom, which is basically physics doing you a solid. And the cool part is that the Inuit can get this working even when it's raining sideways. They create a little shelter with their knees and parka, making a dry workspace barely bigger than a laptop. They've got a saying that translates to, "The fire lives in the wood. We just have to convince it to come out and play," which is a much nicer way of saying, keep sawing until your arm feels like it's going to fall off. When you finally get an ember, that tiny glowing coal that looks like a miniature star, you've got to transfer it to your tinder bundle faster than a cat chasing a laser pointer. One wrong move and your ember dies, which is why the Inuit practice this move until they can do it in their sleep. Research shows that an experienced Inuit fire starter can get from first bow stroke to ember in under 90 seconds. Though it took me about 90 minutes and most of my dignity, but getting an ember is only half the battle. Now you've got to protect this tiny spark of hope from the wind and rain that seem determined to ruin your day. Protecting a fire from rain and wind is like trying to keep a birthday candle lit during a food fight. It takes strategy, skill, and maybe a little bit of luck. The Inuit have mastered this art through centuries of trial and error, and they've got more tricks up their sleeves than a magician at a kid's party. First up, location, location, location. The Inuit know that trying to start a fire in an exposed area during a storm is like trying to take a nap at a rock concert. It's just not going to work. They look for natural windbreaks like rock formations or dense tree clusters. A good spot can reduce wind speed by up to 90%, which means the difference between a cozy fire and a face full of smoke doing the cha-cha. Studies of traditional Inuit fire sites show they typically choose locations with at least 2 natural wind barriers whenever possible. But they don't just rely on what nature gives them. The Inuit are masters at building windbreaks from whatever's around. In winter, they'll craft snow walls that look like mini fortresses. During warmer months, they stack rocks in a horseshoe shape with the opening facing away from the wind. Here's a fact. Tests show that a properly built 3-foot-high stone windbreak can protect a fire from winds up to 30 miles per hour. The fire pit itself is another piece of engineering genius. They dig it slightly deeper on the windward side, creating what scientists now call a pressure differential. That's just a fancy way of saying they make the wind jump over the fire instead of blowing through it. They'll often dig small drainage channels too, like tiny moats around their fire castle, to keep rainwater from turning their fire pit into a tiny swimming pool. Traditional Inuit fire pits have been found with elaborate drainage systems that could handle up to 2 inches of rainfall per hour. What really makes me laugh is their clever use of logs. They arrange them like spokes on a wheel, pointing toward the center. As each log burns, they just push it in further, letting gravity do the work. It's like having a self-feeding fire. The lazy person's dream comes true. An elder once told me this technique has saved more hands from burns than all the oven mitts in Canada. The spoke pattern also helps create a natural umbrella effect, as the outer ends of the log stay dry and can be gradually pushed into the fire. The game changer is their rain shield design. They'll create a slanted roof using large pieces of bark or animal hides, positioned so the rain runs off away from the fire. The angle is crucial. Too steep and it catches too much wind, too shallow, and the rain doesn't run off properly. Through generations of practice, they've found that a 45-degree angle works best, providing maximum rain protection while minimizing wind resistance. Modern camping gear companies are still copying this design, though they charge you an arm and a leg for what the Inuit figured out centuries ago. Archaeological evidence suggests some Inuit groups even developed portable fire shields that could be set up in under a minute. Now that we've got our fire protected from the elements like a precious jewel in a fortress, it's time to talk about the most important part: building up your fire from a tiny spark to a roaring blaze that'll keep you warmer than your grandmother's hand-knitted sweater. The Inuit begin with their tinder, that precious fat wood moss or birch bark we talked about earlier. They fluff it up until it looks like a bird's nest made by a very messy bird. A master fire builder once told me that good tinder should be as fluffy as his grandfather's eyebrows, and believe me, those eyebrows were legendary. The trick comes with the first layer of kindling. Twigs that are thinner than your pinky finger get arranged in a pattern that looks like a tiny log cabin built by minimalist mice. The Inuit have found that standing the twigs up at slight angles creates tiny air pockets. These act like tiny chimneys, feeding oxygen to your baby fire. Studies have shown this method increases oxygen flow by up to 60% compared to just throwing sticks in a pile. They've even tested this in wind tunnels, proving that angled twigs maintain airflow even in strong winds. Next come the medium-sized sticks, about as thick as a candy bar. But here's where most people mess up worse than a penguin at a desert survival course. You can't just throw these on like you're playing stick Jenga. The Inuit place them in a star pattern, with the thick ends pointing out. This creates a natural rain shield and lets you push the sticks in as they burn. Here's a fact: this technique uses 30% less wood than random stick placement because each piece burns completely. Traditional Inuit fire builders can maintain a cooking fire for over 4 hours using just one armload of properly arranged sticks. The big logs come last, but timing is everything. Add them too soon, and you'll squash your fire faster than a sumo wrestler sitting on a sandwich. Wait too long, and your fire will fizzle out like a bad joke at a family dinner. The Inuit way is to wait until you see what they call the dancing flames, when the fire is strong enough to make shadows dance on nearby surfaces. Tests show the ideal temperature for adding large logs is around 600 degrees Fahrenheit, which happens about 3 to 4 minutes after your medium sticks catch properly. And here's the thing. Inuit fire builders can tell if wood is dry enough just by its weight and the sound it makes when tapped against another piece. If it sounds like knocking on a door, it's good to go. If it sounds like hitting a wet sponge, keep looking. They've got a whole system of wood testing sounds that's been passed down through generations. Recent studies have shown their audio testing method is accurate 92% of the time, better than some electronic moisture meters. Now that your fire's going strong, it's time to learn the secret art of watching and waiting, a skill that makes the difference between a long-lasting blaze and a soggy disappointment. Your patience level needs to be higher than a cat's ego when it comes to maintaining a fire in the rain. The Inuit don't just plop down next to their fire and scroll through TikTok. They're constantly reading the weather like it's their favorite book. Studies show they make micro adjustments to their fires on average every 4 to 6 minutes during rainfall, which is more attention than most people give their Instagram feeds. Weather watching becomes second nature to them. They'll spot a change in wind direction faster than a teenager spots their crush walking down the hall. The Inuit know that clouds have personalities. Some are just passing by to say hi, while others want to stick around and rain on your parade. Research has found they can predict weather changes up to 2 hours in advance just by watching cloud patterns and wind shifts. But the trick is in the timing. My first attempt at maintaining a rain fire was like trying to coordinate a kindergarten dance recital. Pure chaos. But the Inuit, they've got timing. They know exactly when to adjust the logs, when to add more fuel, and when to strengthen their rain shields. Tests show their fire tending techniques can maintain a steady temperature within a 50-degree range, even during heavy rainfall. And guess what? They've developed a whole system of smoke signals that aren't actually meant to be signals. By watching how the smoke moves, they can tell when rain is about to get heavier or lighter. If the smoke starts swirling like a drunk ballerina, that means the wind patterns are changing. Recent meteorological studies have confirmed that these smoke patterns can predict weather changes with 85% accuracy. Temperature control is another art form. Most people think keeping a fire hot is the goal, but that's like thinking the only way to drive a car is at full speed. The Inuit maintain different heat zones in their fire for different purposes. They'll keep one side cooler for drying out damp wood, around 200 degrees Fahrenheit, while the other side blazes away at 700 degrees for cooking. They've even got a special technique for creating what they call a sleeping fire that can burn for hours on minimal fuel. One elder told me their secret is treating the fire like a living thing. You wouldn't ignore your dog for hours, he said, so why would you ignore your fire? They've got a point. I've seen fires die faster than my phone battery just because someone thought they could set it and forget it like some infomercial cooking gadget. Now, time to learn the final piece of this puzzle, keeping that precious flame alive through a long, wet night. Because staying warm and dry isn't just about comfort, it's about survival. And the Inuit have turned this necessity into an art form that's more reliable than my old math teacher's multiplication tables. They make fire maintenance look as easy as breathing, while the rest of us run around like caffeinated squirrels when our flames start to sputter. The secret lies in what they call reading the night. The Inuit know that weather between dusk and dawn changes more often than a teenager's mood. Fascinating research shows that air temperature can drop by up to 15 degrees in just 30 minutes after sunset, which means your fire tending game needs to level up. They adjust their fire structure about every 20 minutes during these temperature swings. That's dedication that would put most Instagram influencers to shame. Here's something amusing. The Inuit can maintain a fire through an entire night using 40% less wood than modern camping methods. They do this by creating what scientists now call a sustainable burn pattern. By positioning logs in a special way, think of it like playing Tetris with burning wood. They create pockets of intense heat that keep burning even when the outer parts of the fire get rained on. Their night fire technique involves something pretty clever called the long log method. Instead of cutting all their wood into short pieces like most of us would, they use full-length logs arranged like bicycle spokes. As each log burns, they simply push it further into the center. This method keeps your hands toasty and your back lazy. A win-win if you ask me. Tests show this technique can maintain a steady temperature of 500 degrees Fahrenheit for up to 8 hours with minimal attention. But my favorite is how they handle the dreaded middle of the night maintenance. You know, when you're cozy in your sleeping bag and the last thing you want to do is go out in the rain to feed the fire. The Inuit developed a system of banking coals that's more reliable than my morning alarm clock. They create what they call a heat vault by burying hot coals under a specific arrangement of ash and partially burned logs. This keeps the fire alive at a lower temperature, around 300 degrees Fahrenheit, which is perfect for those midnight hours when you'd rather be dreaming about pizza than playing firekeeper. They've got a saying that translates roughly to, "The night tests both the fire and the firekeeper." I learned this lesson the hard way when I fell asleep and woke up to nothing but cold ashes and regret. But using these Inuit techniques, modern survival experts have achieved a 95% success rate in maintaining fires through rainy nights. The true wisdom behind all these techniques comes from something deeper than just knowing where to put the logs and when to add more fuel. The Inuit approach brings a kind of inner calm to fire making that might just change how you look at challenges.